Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Way is in Training. This is a podcast exploring how warriors should train and fight, as well as how they should live. We will talk about technique, but we'll also dive deep into fitness, mindset, and strategy. We will explore leadership and philosophy as well. So whether you are a young soldier, a veteran police officer, a responsible armed citizen, or simply someone looking for an authentic life, let's examine how the lessons of combat and preparation for it can help us fulfill our potential. Let's explore the way together and learn how the discipline of training can show us our true selves amidst the chaos of life. Hey everybody, welcome back. On this episode, I've got my old friend Doug Bernard. We actually met in the Special Forces Qualification Course about 300 years ago, it seems these days. Incredibly athletic individual, which drove me crazy at the time, to be honest, because I could never figure out how to run faster than him. Still can't run faster than him, I'm sure. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, Doug, before we get any further into it?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on the show. To clarify a little bit, I think we officially met in the Morse code room
Yes.
prior to the actual Q course. So there wasn't a lot of interaction, but there was a lot of shared suffering. And also to be really clear, like if it's a short distance, you're definitely faster than I am. So it's the long distance. I came into the military in '94. I had a background in cross-country skiing and a little bit of climbing, mostly as an athlete, but I had run out of money for college and figured that I would take advantage of the GI Bill, and I was pretty sure I would just do it for one tour and then be done. But it turned out I really liked it, and I stayed in. I wound up staying on a team originally after completing the Q course in '97. I was put on a water team, but quickly moved on to a mountain team, which is where my passion lay, and then was able to stay mostly on teams for the rest of my 22 years. And then I got out in 2016. But throughout that time, I also raced as a biathlete for the military. I got to go to World Military Games, got to compete all over the world also. So I was always balancing my team responsibilities with racing biathlon, which is ski and shoot. And then as a function of being on a mountain team, I was able to go to both the summer and winter mountain courses in Vermont, which are a great course, and then also the Special Operations Mountaineering course, which is in Colorado. And they sort of bounce around a little bit to get a little bit more glaciated terrain and also some winter stuff. But the main headquarters, the training facility is in Colorado Springs with 10th Group.
Now, you had done cross-country skiing at a pretty high level, right, before coming into the Army?
Yeah, I'd raced as a cross-country skier and a biathlete, and I missed getting onto the World Junior team by a slot. I just couldn't seem to put together shooting with a high pulse rate and shooting accurate with a high pulse rate and skiing fast. And I really had no training at that point. I had no coaching. It was all self-taught. And then once I came into the military, I started getting some training, and I was able to take my shooting percentage from about 30% to about 90%, which is a big difference, especially in that sport where you're talking about one target. A 10% change in your shooting is often the difference between like bottom half of the field or winning the race.
Do you happen to know Lanny Barnes, any chance?
I have run across her. She's a bit younger than I am, but she raced in Colorado when I was trying to go to school in Colorado and racing biathlon in Colorado. So I think she's from sort of the Winter Park area potentially,
Yeah.
but a super talented athlete, great shot. And
I've gotten to know her fairly well, and she's just good people and an incredible athlete, just so gifted.
yeah, she definitely put in the time. It's always hard when you make these jumps. Like, she went from being a really good junior athlete and just kept progressing, up and making those jumps to the next level every time she went up.
I know her through shooting circles. We both did some stuff with staccato, and both her and her sister. It's kind of cool to watch. They do like this trick shot shtick where they're like on rollerblades and shooting targets, and they're like on unicycles and shooting targets, and it's kind of neat. It's kind of cool to watch. And they mess with everybody by trying to see if you can tell which one is which,
Right.
because they're twins. Yeah, yeah. But no, she's good people.
Yeah.
So I got a question for you, and I know how this applies to the things I've done athletically, but I'm kind of curious to hear your take on it for things like mountaineering and cross country skiing and all of that. How did the institutional training you got in the Army, because I mean, even special operations is still institutional training, how did that differ from like your own training and your own learning in the same skills? Like, how did that compare and contrast?
Well, that's a great question. I think they were actually pretty similar. I was really fortunate to have great coaches as a junior, who really focused on the basics and sort of mastering the basic skills. Because I think you can't build on the advanced skills. You can't progress if you don't have a foundation. And I think it's tempting for everyone to look at like trying to shortcut the process. But you have to lay the foundation. You have to build the skills over time. And I think that, you know, I think I would maybe liken it to some of the marksmanship training we did on the teams, and they it really um seemed like you're always taking a step back when you went to one of the courses, like a cephalic course. And I've been out long enough, I don't know what they're calling it now, but if you go to one of those courses, it's basically the same instruction every time, and you go back to focusing on the fundamentals. And those fundamentals drive the advanced skills, because if you can't master those fundamentals, then it really doesn't matter. You can't progress. And that's true with the fitness aspect of it too, which is if you don't lay the groundwork of it and build the engine, you like it's like you're going to burn out without having the background. And those skills accrue over time. You see again and again people talking about making these huge skill progression jumps, and then what they realize is that they didn't have the years of experience of of making mistakes and succeeding, but being able to debrief it so that they learn from the mistakes and they build on the success. And that's true. Like with fitness, you have to try things and find things that work for you and figure out how you're going to get stronger. But you still need the base of time. And especially now, as an older athlete in a young guy's game, um, that background serves me really well, and that ability to sort of harness all of that background and see the nuance and where to apply a skill that's what I think those sort of foundational skills that they teach that seem super basic, but they really are the foundation for all the advanced stuff you're going to do.
Well, I think there's the famous quote that mastery is just the basics executed well under stress. And I think there's a lot to that, because you look at like one of the concepts I've been kind of doing a deep dive for the last several years about, like sports psychology and training methodology and stuff. And you know how they talk about chunking for skills? You familiar with the term?
No, I don't think I've heard that one.
So basically, like a chunk of skill is like it's a piece of your skill set that you can plug into different places. So it's like you wind up like putting these skills together like you're building a Lego set, right?
Okay.
And when you're given a problem to solve, if you've got enough experience and you're good at the individual skills, the Lego blocks, the chunks, then you learn to just assemble them as need be to handle whatever problem you're given. And if you think about it, like think about all the stuff we did in the military, like, all the all the battle drills, all the immediate action stuff, like all of that, we were building these chunks to use if a problem came in, or like shooting or combatives, like, my two passions, right? Like it's not about, fancy, flowery, exotic techniques. It's about, like you said, just like the good foundation and being able to apply those in a variety of circumstances and apply them well.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think that, like having more chunks or more tools in the toolbox is a huge advantage. And knowing the simplest, most elegant tool to use at the time is whether you're shooting or moving through an environment or climbing mountains or doing whatever, it's all about the efficiency of movement and the efficiency of the technique. And if you only know one technique, like you'll figure it out. It's like if you're trying to tie into a rope and you only know one knot, well, you'll figure out how to use that one knot, but it may not be elegant. But if you have a whole set of tools, you're going to find a pretty elegant, efficient solution. You actually need fewer tools, like equipment tools, to be able to accomplish it. If you have the movement technique, if you have the fitness, if you have the skill set, you can do a lot with very little. And then you can be much more efficient moving through that. I would liken it to, I'm sure you remember this. There was never enough money to maintain gear, and sometimes your optics went down. And I went through a whole cephalic with just iron sights, and was able to shoot as well as anyone with just iron sights because it's all fundamentals. And it's once you put the sights back on, then it's just effortless because you've
Yeah.
mastered the fundamentals of everything that goes into it. And that's similar to going through some of the sniper schools that you go through. They forced us to shoot with iron sights out to 600 yards. And it seemed incredibly basic, and it was like 2 weeks out of the 6 was just iron sights. But man, you put an optic on, and having mastered those skills, you knew exactly, you weren't distracted by the technology because you'd mastered the skill. And then when you put the technology back on, you could take those chunks of skills and put them into place and use it really efficiently.
And I think that's kind of a universal truth, I think. I mean, it just like across the board, it's whether you're talking about, I mean, any skill, I'm certainly not a musician, but I'm sure it would apply there as well. Like any of these things, like you have to have that true grasp of the basics and learn how to put the basics together in different combinations. But like I don't think anything advanced that isn't just a more sophisticated combination of the basics probably has a whole lot of value. Like look at the martial arts world. Like some of the fancy kicks some people will do for like tournament competitions that don't really apply anywhere but in that one particular environment. You don't athletically they're very impressive, but it's not a skill you really need to spend a whole lot of time on to learn to defend yourself, you know. And it's got to be the same just across the board, I bet. And I think the same attraction to things that aren't the basics is probably true because of human nature across the board too. Like people get hung up on, some sort of whiz bang either technique or technical piece that they think is going to instantly make them better when it's just about putting in the work to get good at it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I would say I can apply it to a bunch of different scenarios, and I think, for me, navigation is a great demonstration of where the fundamentals apply. Like, yeah, I mean, I use app-based navigation in the mountains a lot right now, and it's a huge tool, but it's a complement to being able to understand how to read a map. Like the very
Yeah.
basic, the day one stuff of navigation is to read a map and understand where you are in the terrain. And the better you get at it, then you start talking about like, oh, I can do this at night. Oh, now I can do this in an environment where like I have no visibility. I almost have vertigo because I can't tell the difference between the snow and the cloud. And there's consequence. So you're not only dealing with a technical skill, but you're dealing with the potential to fall into something or fall off something. Um, and I think there's a real tendency to look for some flashy thing that you've seen somewhere and not understand the context. And I remember watching, we did a bunch of combative stuff at group with a guy who taught a variation of Filipino fighting, stick fighting.
Yeah,
And
I don't know him, but I know who he is. What's
Jared
his name?
Wahongi.
Yep, Garrett Wahungi.
And he was an unbelievable martial artist, but all of his stuff was focused on the fundamentals. And if you use these techniques, you could learn to apply them to a variety of things. And so they were really good for someone like me, whose passion was never being close enough to have to use those techniques, to be able to learn some basics and master those basics efficiently. And that's no different than any of these skills. Whether you're talking about navigation or climbing or skiing or fighting or shooting, like the fundamental techniques, if you know those techniques, are going to let you build and then know when to apply the fancy technique in the right context so that it works.
Well, it's what's the rule? The Pareto principle rule, right? 80% of the stuff in your skill set only gives you 20% of the results, and 20% of your skill set gives you 80% of the results.
Right.
And I think I mean, of course, the proportions are going to be off. They're not exact numbers, I'm sure, but
Right.
I think there's a lot of truth to that too, for everything, like going back to comms, we were talking about me being an 18 Echo before we started the podcast. Like, I understand why they don't teach Morse code anymore. And God knows I would have liked not having to learn it because it was a pain to learn. But when you knew it, you could make comms anywhere. Like it could be done. You could cannibalize an FM radio and make comms if you had to, right?
Right.
And just like I think GPS is inhibiting a lot of people's navigational skills, like you were talking about. They're not really learning terrain association the same way. They're not learning all those like really basic skills that aren't flashy and aren't tech based and aren't sexy. But the thing is, anything mechanical breaks. And if the GPS goes down, if you can terrain associate and you can read a compass and look at a map and read a map, you'll be okay.
Right. Yeah. And I think also like knowing when there's been some interesting studies about for navigation about how some of the technology is actually hurting our ability mentally to process space and to think about spatial awareness. And so, like making sure that you're training your brain to be able to think of these things and hold all of these things in your head so that you have the bandwidth to do the other things. You need to, if you can't navigate sort of in the back of your head, you're always going to have the compass, the app, whatever, right in front of you, and then you have no bandwidth to manage other things. And so if you can't move efficiently in the terrain, whether that's moving through a house or moving the mountains, then you can't build on that to have the bandwidth to actually do the other skills that are required to run at the same time.
So I got to tell you something funny. You just used my exact analogy as far as the hard skills of shooting and going through the shoot house in CQB. Like, I mean, exactly, like almost word for word, except you were talking about a different skill set.
Yeah.
Yeah, I talk to people all the time about how you have to build, like we all have this computer in our heads, and you have to actually literally build the bandwidth to handle these mental functions. You've got to train that. You got to train that attribute. And if your shooting isn't running subconsciously, you can't be good tactically because you're thinking about the shooting.
Yep.
And that's got to be
Yeah.
a program in the background.
Yep. And I think for me, like I remember the first couple of times, first couple of run throughs when I first went through SFOIC, I felt like I was looking through a straw, and you're barely trying to like identify the target. And by the end of the course, and certainly after a couple of repetitions, a couple of years later, you're almost shooting without thinking.
Yeah.
And you're thinking about like how many rooms are left, where do I have to go, what has to happen, who has to be where.
Yeah, the things the conscious mind has to do,
Right.
but you've got to have the rest of it running in the subconscious mind, so you're not eating up your conscious mind bandwidth thinking about pressing the trigger. You
Right.
know.
Yeah. And that's similar for me, like moving through the mountains. I need to have the fitness to not be at my max. I need to have the technique not to be at my max so that I can be thinking about how to move myself and other people efficiently through these places that have consequence. So that I'm thinking two or three pitches ahead or two or three moves ahead to be able to get there efficiently and not get hung up just trying to get through one section. So it's all super similar, and I feel like all that training of all those years of learning techniques in higher consequence environments just helped me prepare for what I do now. So
Well, I think there's like a universal truth too, that you learn to learn by training at difficult things. You know what I mean? Like you're actually learning the process of learning a difficult, high stakes skill. And you
right,
get better at that the more you work on that. Just like you get better at teaching the more you work on teaching. I mean, teaching's a skill separate from the skill being taught also. And like I think I'm a big martial arts history buff. We've known each other a long time. Miyamoto Musashi said, he's got that famous quote, from one way, no 10,000 ways, or from one thing, no 10,000 things. And what I think he meant was not the old trap that intelligent people fall into, where they think because they're educated in one field, they know everything about every field, because that's a trap. But what I think Musashi meant was that if you learn the process of mastering something, then it becomes easier to master other things, because now you understand the process of attaining mastery. And especially if all you're looking for is competence in these other skills. If you have a wide variety of skills you have to be competent at, but you don't necessarily have to be a master of, you can get pretty good at picking things up and building those tools for your toolbox.
yeah, I think like being able to stay curious about learning new things is really important, and being dedicated to sort of the process, and that process involves failure. Like
Oh yeah.
you're gonna miss, and sometimes sometimes you're gonna miss pretty big. And the question is like, what do you do when that happens? And so how do you debrief that and figure out what do I need to do to get there? And that's what you want to do is do that in low consequence environments where you can screw it up and nothing really serious happens, so that you learn the lesson or figure out what skill you've got to acquire and then go back and master that skill. And um, there's been some really interesting commentary from like elite level mountaineers about like that's what's so fun about mountaineering, is that it's all these problems thrown at you at once, and you're definitely going to get out there and realize you don't have the skills. And what's fun to me is that you realize that, like, enough to know that you're in over your head, and you back off and you come back having done the training to master the skills. You're like, okay, so I have to learn this skill set to go to this objective. And so I can go home, I can work on that in a low consequence environment and master it, so that when I get out there, then I have all the skills I need. And in a really fluid environment like in the mountains, that's going to happen a lot. And you have to be pretty humble about the fact that like you really don't have control over this. And so knowing when to back off is a big part of it. Um, and knowing when to push through.
And in the context you're talking about, that can literally be a life or death decision. Like being overconfident can get you killed pretty quick. But I think that in general, just in terms of finding mastery, finding self-improvement, right? Working on a skill, I think ego is the death of improvement, not pride. It's good to be proud. It's good to be motivated. It's good to have a good, like healthy sense of self, right? But that arrogance that says I can solve anything, I can handle any problem, I can do anything, or that ego that is an attachment to how you appear, right? I've got to look like the guy that never misses in a shooting match. I've got to look like the guy that can do this. I think that those things can only hold you back and sometimes have some pretty severe consequences too.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I think that that fear of being perceived as not the thing that you want to be is a pretty powerful negative motivator for a lot of people. And that attitude of like, and I can't remember which one of my mentors told me this, but like that idea of like someone's like, yeah, I'm good. Like you would roll out for training and you'd do it once and you succeeded, but maybe it wasn't perfect. Or maybe you succeeded and it was just lucky.
Yeah.
And the idea of like, oh, we're good. I'm like, no, what you just said is you're good enough, not that you're actually good. And the motivation to keep pushing to get better so that you, if you're going to fall back on your level of training is higher. And to be able to be humble about like, was I really good or was I just lucky is pretty powerful. I mean, I remember shooting with you on the range and we had a guy from another unit come out and we were sort of doing trick shooting, like seeing how far we could shoot. And I remember like making a shot and being pretty chuffed, like I'm the man. I kind of made that shot. And this guy turned to me with a straight face and said, okay, do it again.
I remember this. Yep.
And it was such a powerful lesson about like, yeah, great, you did it once. Can you do it again? Can you repeat that performance over and over again? And how do you train so that you can do that? Like, don't be afraid to fail trying, but recognize when it was luck and when it was skill.
And I think this is a particularly dangerous trap, I think, for people younger than us, because we didn't have Instagram, we didn't have TikTok, we didn't have these like real quick bites of somebody showing what they could do once
Mhm.
and how cool it looks. And one of the things I say in my classes all the time is that none of us are as good as we are on Instagram in real life. Like nobody is, including me, because obviously you're posting your best stuff because it's what you're proud of, right? So I
Yeah.
think there's an easy disconnect, but it's especially easy, I think, for like the current generation of athletes and shooters and soldiers, right? Is that we conflate what we did once when we had all the time in the world to do it again if we felt like it. There was no psychological pressure. We were in a very comfortable environment and we did it 20 times to get that one run. And if we hadn't gotten it that time, we could have done 25 or 30, right?
Right.
But it's easy to go, well, that's how good I am. That's not how good you are. How good you are is the average of all 20, 25 runs, right?
Yeah.
You need to measure the ceiling or the floor, not the ceiling, you
Right.
know? And it's such an easy trap to fall into. Lord knows I've done it, but it's, you do something that one time and you're like, you metaphorically drop the mic and kind of you feel real good about yourself. And it's an illusion because you did it one time and you could have taken 20 more tries to try to do it and nothing would have mattered.
Right. Well, and it's just a snapshot of that one moment.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's not the consistent snapshot. It's not the consistent picture of everything that you've done. And I think what a lot of people miss, they see people do these incredible things on the socials or, in a movie or in a competition. And what they miss are all the years of experience of building the skill set to be able to do that. And, a lot of these things like talent matters, but training is essential,
Yeah.
and you can train people to do this. When I first got home, I was working with some guys and they had a bit of training and they had sort of short circuited um, a lot of the progression and they were shooting pretty well, but they asked if I would come in and like do a little bit of training with them and they all felt that like it was pretty basic what I was teaching them. And I was like, well, yes. And it's the basics that mattered. And when we built it back up and we put them out there and we ran through the same drills that they'd been running, because they had a set of standards, they're pretty solid standards. And they all did better. And
Well,
they,
of course.
because they had taken the time and it took us probably, it was like 8 sessions before we got there or something, but they all were better at the end of it. And it was like, oh yeah, Like what you're not seeing is that the guy who was teaching you before had years of experience. And so he makes it look easy, but he has decades of shooting and
Yeah,
experience.
it's so I think another thing that's important too is I think people need to, like we were kind of touching on this a minute ago, but and I have been so guilty of this because you know my personality type, right? Like I said, I've gotten wiser as I've gotten older, but I'm still me. Um, we tend to focus on the amount of work, which is important. The amount of effort is important, but it doesn't matter if you're not doing the effort in the right way. Like if you're not attentive to the training process and understanding it and doing the reps the right way and getting the right data points and feedback and adjusting properly and all of those things that go into progression, you know. I think one of the current buzzwords is deliberate practice. And it's just like just being, you know, kind of, it's going to sound hippie-ish, but mindful and attentive in your practice. And I think that's a big thing that a lot of people miss.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I think when we're talking about, I teach a lot of classes to people just learning about traveling through the backcountry and being safe in avalanche terrain. And one of the things that we try to bring out is that you want to be really, again, like this is going to sound like some new age woo woo kind of stuff, but you want to be present in that moment. And if we translate it into different terminology, it just means like being aware of your surroundings
Yeah.
and being able to feel what's happening around you and to be there and to have your attention be focused because there's a lot of stuff to miss. And then afterwards, making sure that you're running through an honest debrief about like what did we do well, what could we improve, how do we get better, and that really helps people progress faster. And so like that deliberate practice is not it's not something to just it's not just junk hours that help you. It's like the focused practice. It's like the difference between like going and shooting 200 rounds and doing 50 good dry fires where you're
Yeah.
really present for everything and doing everything right. um, and learning and building that skill set through that deliberate practice so that it becomes unconscious, and being able to again have that bandwidth to see what's going on. But yeah, and also I think there's a big focus for me of like breaking the skills down. Like what's the fitness component? How do I train that? How do I, especially as also someone who's over 50, like how do I manage the intensity and the volume that I need balanced with recovery so that I keep staying strong so that I have the physical ability to then do the technical skills, and practicing those. And like some days, especially, so climbing is a great example. Like there is a mental component to climbing that some days you just don't have it. And recognizing that, like, I'm just scared today, like I don't want to fall. I don't want to get hurt. I'm not going to push the envelope. And maybe those are days where those hours aren't as valuable because you're learning the wrong skills. And being able to, like, if it's a physical training day and you wake up tired, like realizing maybe that's not the day for an intensity day.
Yeah.
Or if you're trying to climb hard, coming out there and being able to like be in the moment and climb with the intent of succeeding as opposed to the fear of failing. Like in climbing, especially if you're always afraid of falling and you're climbing to avoid falling, that's a very different mental aspect than like climbing to make the move and climbing to succeed as opposed to fail.
I think that's no different. You made me think of so many things in that last little section, but the last one with the intent to succeed, right? I think finding the right way to frame those things in your mind matters so much to every activity. Look at anything combative, anything martial, right? The people that are worried about getting hurt, are worried about losing, usually lose or get hurt. Where the people that they're focused on success rather than personal risk, not to the point of being foolhardy. I'm not saying that. That's not what I'm talking about, right? You're not ignoring risk, you're mitigating risk, but you're not letting risk drive your decision-making process.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know,
I mean,
I think
it's just like, it's like shooting, if you're trying not to miss, you're probably going to miss.
yes,
But if you're doing the things to make the hit, you might miss, but chances are you're going to lead to the outcome that you want. So,
the better you're plugged into the process, the better the outcome.
right.
And people think about the outcome. All right, I'm going to redo that one so I hit the damn mic. You need to think about the process and be plugged into the process, not be overly concerned with the outcome. I think the more people focus on the outcome, the less likely they are to have the positive outcome. But if they focus on doing the correct process, the results will take care of themselves, whether we're talking about fitness training or tactics or anything really.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think, like, in climbing, if you're on rock, it's a lot about believing that your feet are going to stick to the rock and putting them there in the way and moving in the way that keeps them there, as opposed to like just trying to pull yourself up something, or if you're talking,
I feel personally attacked there.
I'm not making a judgment specifically about you, but maybe more about type. But it's always impressive when you watch someone who, like, you watch them climb and you can just tell that they are climbing purely to succeed, and they're totally in that moment of like doing everything to make those hard moves. And it looks effortless as opposed to it looks like a struggle. So,
Well, and I think there's a correlation there with the proper mental state, right? Like whether you want to call it the flow state or the zone or whatever buzzword is popular this week, or if you're a martial artist, you want to call it Mushen, no mind, it's all the same stuff, right? So I think that thing you're talking about mentally is one of the components of being able to get into that mental state, being in the right mind frame to get into that flow state where everything happens subconsciously and naturally and you perform better.
yeah. Yeah. And I think there's also a component of, like, you need to have everything else lining up, um, to be able to relax into that state. And I think a lot of people, they focus on the individual skills as opposed to the community that they're working in. And in climbing, there's someone, unless you're Alex Honnold and you're free soloing, you're climbing with someone who's holding the rope for you, and they're going to catch you if you fall. And I definitely have climbing partners where I trust them completely. And something as small as like believing that your partner will catch you if you fall is huge. But also something as small as, like, when they see you struggling, having them say the right thing that lets you relax again and get back in the state. Because sometimes you drift out of the state and you drift out of the moment, and having someone bring you back and let you know that they have your back and that they have, you have their full support and they believe in you, can also help that. And that's, to me, that's a lot like working as a team. Like, if you're going through training with a bunch of people you don't know, it's really hard to really relax. But if you're going through training with 11 other guys that you trust implicitly and you know their skill set and you know they have your back, it's way easier. I mean, you're going to get ribbed if you screw up, and it's not a question of when you screw up, or if you screw up, it's when you screw up. And people have nicknames accordingly. But you also know that you trust them, and you trust them to have your back no matter, what you're doing.
No, that's powerful for sure. And that was one of my favorite things about being on a team, quite honestly, was that level of cohesiveness. And it's like we were talking about building the athletic skills. It takes time to develop that too. Like that's not an instantaneous thing. No matter how much you jive with somebody right away, you've still got to put in those hours of working together to be able to like we'll go back to CQB, right? if you're on a team that's really good at CQB and you all know each other really well, you don't even talk much because you see their body language and you know what it means, and vice versa, right? Like there's been that many hours of training and practice together. It's like a good athletic team. It's like a good football team or soccer team or baseball or basketball. Like people that work together all the time in that high stress environment start to really be able to read each other and read off each other and play off each other, which makes everybody stronger as a unit than they would be as a collection of talented individuals.
You know, and a lot of times too, it's about matching up personalities. You know, teams are infamous for having personalities, and that is both a positive and a negative thing. And so being able to match those personalities, if you really want to work hard and you have this huge work ethic and you're going to keep trying and you're around a bunch of people who want to just do the minimum, there's going to be friction. And if
Yeah.
and so like matching, and also just the ethic of how you approach things, all those things, those all matter. And whether you're tied into a rope with one person or you're going through a house with 11 others, like all of those things matter. So if you don't have like the confidence that everything is going to be supported, then it's really hard to make those really challenging moves and be in that moment because you're thinking about something else. And other thoughts, probably not positive ones, start coming into your head about doubt and fear and like, do I have the talent to do this? As opposed to like that moment when you can just let go and climb at your talent and be in the zone, like it just feels effortless. I would liken it to, like either CQB shooting or biathlon shooting. You're shooting on every breath, and that's fast. And man, when it happens, it's amazing. It's like 5 perfect shots in less than 5 seconds, you know, and that's with a high heart rate. And it's just, sometimes you look at the last shot and you're like, oh my God, I just hit all of them. Because you sort of let go and let all the training take over. So
Well, and that's like what makes it, as far as like athletic competition, I think those moments are what makes it worth it, because it's such, and it's the same thing with the military too, really. Like those moments on the team, or that's what makes all the effort and stupid you had to wade through to get there all worth it, right?
yeah,
Having like those like shining moments of truly being alive. And I think that that's something that this stuff, like, no matter what you're working to be good at, whether it's biathlon or cross country skiing or competitive shooting, or it could be anything, could be stock car racing, it could be any activity, any pursuit. But if you go into it to that level, right, to that amount of effort, to where it becomes effortless, I think those moments of like effortless performance are just something to be treasured so much. Like, and I feel sorry for people that have never experienced that.
yeah. No, and I think it's also really rewarding to know that you put the time in, that you did all the stuff that had to be done, and at whatever level. You think about like making jumps in your ability. And it's like every time you make a jump in ability, everyone is good, right? Like if you go from being a high school athlete to being a college athlete, yeah, everyone, maybe you were a star in high school, but now everyone on your team was a star in high school. And if you go from that level to a professional level, again, everyone was a good amateur athlete. And now,
Yeah.
now you're all competing at the same time. And the people who make those jumps are the people who can sort of swallow their pride, realize that they have to keep working, and then progress and then really make progress because they're humble about their ability and their deficits.
And I think too that people that learn to prioritize the process, the training process, once again, we're going back to something we kind of talked about in a different way a minute ago, process as opposed to results. This is a different context, but it's the same kind of idea. Like if I fall in love with the process of training for competitive shooting, I may not be a national champion, but I will become a good competitive shooter because I've fallen in love with the process. But
Right.
if I focus on the results, then I'm not guaranteeing any real outcome. And it's not as much fun. Like I think that there's a real pleasure to be had in the process, in the just kind of that ritual of doing work, a lot of it alone, and really getting into the nuts and bolts of training. I think can really have huge benefits across the board for everything in your life. Because now you've fallen in love with the idea of doing the work. And the
Yeah.
results come from doing the work, no matter what we're talking about.
Well, and I think also sometimes the results are less tangible. You could put all the work in and not succeed.
Yeah.
But the result for you personally would be like, well, sometimes I'm like, I did everything that I could have done. And sometimes I'm not going to succeed. And that's okay because I took the time and did it right. Versus if you don't do the process, if you don't do the work and you get out there and fail, you can always find something to blame. And I think that it's way more rewarding to put the time in and develop all the skills. There's a whole bunch of side benefits too, right? Like, like feeling good about what you've done, knowing you put in the work, being tired because you worked hard, like feeling like you've accomplished something. And just because you don't win or you don't make the next jump doesn't mean you didn't do the work and you don't have something to show for it. And
Well,
all of us have a ceiling.
and I think people confuse too, like, so you winning a big cross country skiing competition or a big biathlon competition, right? You could still be just as good on that day as you were and not win based on just either luck or who showed up or who had, a little bit more natural talent. It doesn't take anything away from the effort you put in and the results you got. And I think that focusing on those external validations of our skill can be misleading, right?
Absolutely.
Whereas if you focus on, the actual, those basic building blocks, like we talked about, and the metrics of performance on those and where you're at with that. And you really, I mean, it sounds trite. It sounds just as new age as some of the other stuff we said, but really your competition is yourself. You're trying to beat the person you were yesterday. And
Yeah.
then tomorrow I'll try to beat the person I was today.
Yeah. And I think that there's, like in climbing, we joke about, like if you succeed at a climb, you've sent it. Um, but there comes a point where you start to unsend things, like there's something, maybe you did it once and then you can't do it again and you unsend it. Um, and recognizing like, maybe I wasn't there, maybe I didn't do the training. And then sort of the question of like, well, do I need this? Like, am I having so much fun at the level that I'm at? Like I feel good. I have time for a social life. Like I have time for a partner. I have time to like mow the lawn. Like it's great to be incredibly focused. And I think, like from a character trait standpoint, I recognize that like sometimes I can tune the whole world out and focus really well, but that's not always positive in my life, right? Like sometimes being willing to accept that I might not perform as well, but I have more balance in my life might actually lead me to succeed later on, as opposed to like just getting there quickly and then having none of the rest of it to show for it.
And I think there's a lot of truth there. And I also think it's kind of twofold. Like I think everyone should find something they care enough about to be obsessed for a while at some point in their life. Everybody should have that warrior's quest, right? That Musha Shugyo, being the knight errant. And in the modern day, what that means is just exactly what we were talking about, focusing on something and just putting our all into it, right? To where the whole world fades away. But like you said, it's not healthy to live like that all the time either. And I think you need the balance, and I think you need like I'm at the point now with some of the things that I've done. I've been at this point with martial arts for a while where I'm okay with not being at my peak anymore because it gives me more time to do other things. And I've been doing a lot of shooting competition the last few years, and I can see the signs in myself that in a year or two, I'll be ready to kind of not stop doing it, right? Like I'll always do martial arts, I'll always do shooting in some capacity. But like you said, it's okay to have a life too. It's okay to go, okay, well, I did things and I had a good run, and I'm still going to enjoy the process of training, but maybe I want to live a more well-rounded life now. Maybe I want to be a little more reasonable and even keeled than the obsession it takes to try to master something.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's so much to pull out of a conversation like this, in terms of thinking about, like we as Western civilization people are very focused on this like hero's journey, right? Like, oh, if I just work really hard and I get to this point, right? Like I graduate the Q course and I get my beret and I get my tab, like, okay, what then? Like
Yeah.
like to go back into literature, like you think about Odysseus, like the whole story is him getting home.
Yeah.
But what does he do next? Like, yeah, he succeeded. He got his wife back. Like everything worked, right? But now what? And recognizing that like you're gonna have to take that next step and learn something new and progress in a different way. And like, and that might mean that whether you succeed or fail, like it's all about the next thing you're gonna do. Like if I go out and try a climb that I've been projecting for a while, I've been working on it, I've been thinking about the moves, I've been building the strength to do this thing, I've got maybe the technical skills to do this, and I get to the top of it. And if that was my only goal, what do I do now?
Yeah.
Like, as opposed to like, I mean, I think the Q course is a great example. Like you come out of the Q course and you have achieved this thing that a lot of people never do. But it's really only the table stakes to get into the game.
It's the
You
entry
know?
ticket. It's all it really
Yeah,
is.
exactly. So and now it's like, oh yeah, now I got to learn all these other skills. And I think that's true in a lot of ways of recognizing that like, yeah, it's great to have a goal and it's great to get there, but you want to keep pushing forward. And sometimes pushing forward means not necessarily like the next level, but being happy with where you are, and being able to say like, maybe you're not going to shoot at the level that you were striving for or that you're at, but man, it sure is fun to shoot. And I'm still going to go to the range and I'm still going to have a good time, and that's for me, that's similar with climbing, like I will probably get to a level where I'm like, wow, that was really incredible. But I really like this other thing of just being in the mountains, of just moving through the terrain and having these incredible days and having the skills to be able to make it like even have fun on the easy stuff and just enjoy just the experience of being out there.
I think that this is a trap that gets a lot of people. I really do. And I think it gets a lot of people professionally in our former line of work and in police work, like me being a cop in Chicago. You see people that were very, very good at being a special forces soldier, at being a police officer, a detective, a SWAT operator, whatever, right? And then when they're done, they don't know what to do because their whole world was that. And now they don't have something else to take the place of that. And I'm not saying everybody, but I do see people fall into this trap. And you see it with athletes too. Like, what, like you said, what comes next? You're not on top anymore. You're not playing that game at that level anymore. What comes now? What comes after that? And I think that's both a huge test of someone's character and also another entry ticket to another stage of growth, right? Where you can learn to be something else and appreciate what you were without being wrapped up in the fact that you are not that person maybe anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I
Like,
think the concept of identity and culture is really strong. And I would say, like, especially watching, like, in the veteran community, I live in a town where being a veteran's not a big deal. And there are actually a lot of us. Like, there, there's a kid who is now on my old team who grew up in my town. There's a kid who works in Air Force Special Operations. There are 4 former Green Berets. Nobody walks around with a lot of paraphernalia. Like, every now and then you see a subtle indicator that someone is out there. But all these guys have found, like, 2 other great examples would be Sean Evangelista, um, who used to own 30 Seconds Out. Like, he's always looking to the next thing.
Yeah.
And what he did was what the same thing I've realized that I've done, which is that I've looked at what was important to me about skills and community and culture and people and progression, and found another community to live that in. But it's risky. Like, you could fail. You could not find that. And it's hard when you've been really close and I mean, I still have the same jokes with the guys that I went to Afghanistan with. And it's like falling back into with your brothers.
Yeah.
And it's comforting. And I will always have that. Like, those guys are always my friends and always my brothers. But now I have this new community that some of them don't even know I did anything. And that's fine because they know me as a person. And that's really fun, to be viewed as a competent person and someone who is respected for their work ethic and their attitude. But it's all those things that I wanted from that other life. So that core identity is there. It's just put into a different environment.
Yeah. Still the same person, still the same personality, but a different outlet for your activities,
Yeah.
different social group. And I think that's important too. Like going back to Musashi, right? Towards the end of his life, he took up painting and sculpture. And now he's as famous for that in Japan as he was for being such a badass. And there's something about that, right? There's something about, like, what can I learn now? What can I become good at now? That's
Right.
maybe very different from what I did before, but how can I find the commonalities, and how can I take another journey that satisfies the person I am now, not just the person I was then?
Yeah. And how can I, like, recognize that something doesn't resonate in my life anymore?
Yeah. Well, that's a hard
And
one too.
it's super hard, and especially in these communities where, for a variety of factors, your identity is validated through social media, through your friendships, through your work, through all the things. And so, like, how do you how do you have the courage to say, like, for me, I love to shoot and it's fun, but it's not the driving passion in my life. And and just because a lot of other guys do have that driving passion, like, I love it for them. It's just not the thing that fires me up anymore. And, like, to think about Musashi moving from being a martial artist and a warrior to a poet, and putting the same energy into it and being willing to say, yeah, that was something I did and it was really cool. And I achieved these great things. But now this thing that I'm working on, this is also great. And this is
Yeah.
also something that I have put the same work ethic and the same focus into, to be to try to master. I think that's really cool.
I think it's perhaps one of the secrets to leading a fulfilled life. I really do. And it doesn't mean you have to do things to the same degree that somebody like Musashi did. You don't have to chase the dragon that far, right? But just having this innate desire to learn and experience and accomplish in whatever the arena is, to whatever the level is. But I think without that, I don't think, I just can't see how someone would ever feel like they truly knew themselves if they hadn't done that.
Well, and truly know who is the core person.
Yeah.
Like, if you only know yourself through the external things, the expressions of that person, then you're like, is that truly the core person? Like you think about, like there are people who, like the core person is not very pretty or is great, but you don't really know that if you only know the external expressions of that. And
Yeah.
like finding those people who have the kindness and the grace to be humble about themselves and their life, and to keep learning and progressing in whatever that is. Like one of my mentors used to be one of the he was, I mean, he has skied on the Olympic level, he's coached on that level, he is guided, he's a writer, and he doesn't do much physically anymore, but he's really happy. Like that core person is a really kind, dedicated person. And he's partnered with this woman who's an incredible athlete. And he's so comfortable with who he is that he's like, oh, yeah, go do your thing. Like I'll be here writing. I'll do a gentle walk with the dog. Maybe we'll climb some easy stuff. Maybe we'll ski at the mountain and come back and having done these badass things. And, like the core person is just this really nice guy. And he's a great writer. So, he's taken all those same skills and work ethic and put them into something else.
And that too, like you hear a lot in martial arts about character development, right? And I kind of came up with a theory about that because you don't really see it as much as people say you're going to see it. It's one of those things that is supposed to be the huge benefit, but it happens a lot less frequently than people would think. And I think you can kind of say the same thing about, serving in special operations. Not that I don't love the guys I worked with, but the the common perception of us as some larger than life thing isn't really true. It's people with their foibles and faults and failings like everybody else. I think for the character development to happen, you've got to have a lot of the things you and I have been talking about, not just the hard work, right? Kind of that ability to objectively self-evaluate, that willingness to be alone and work on things, because I really think I've been thinking a lot about this lately. You have to train with other people, no matter what it is you're doing, right? But I think mastery is built alone. I really do. Even in things that require a training partner to do them, there's
Yeah.
still a lot of the work that has to be done inside your own head to make it happen.
Yeah.
And I think that learning to be comfortable with being alone and working on yourself in that way allows you to learn to be comfortable with really looking at who you are and working on yourself in other ways.
Right.
I really strongly believe that. I've been thinking about this a lot lately because we are a culture now. We have so much information at our fingertips 24/7, 365 that our attention spans have suffered. I've noticed it with me. I read books in little chunks now instead of sitting and reading a whole book. Right.
Right.
And I think what we're in danger of losing, just like GPS is making us in danger of losing our basic orienteering skills, I think we're in danger of losing that ability to be alone with ourselves. And I think without that, you'll never be who you were really meant to be. You have to learn to be alone with yourself and to sit with yourself and figure out who you are and what you need to work on.
Yep. Well, and I remember I read it somewhere that like one of the ways that you find out who someone is when they get hurt. You know, like all of us are fairly physical people. We like being out there. Our body is something that we like to use. It's a big expression of what we do, whether it's martial arts or shooting or climbing or skiing. But when you get hurt, are you still a kind person? Are you still a happy person? And being able to say that, like, because I know people who are just, they've gotten hurt and they're like these bitter people. And it's okay to be frustrated that you can't do the thing you wanted to do. But like, man, some people, they just haven't put the time in, when they can't distract themselves, when they can't, like, there's a prevailing sort of joke on social media about like why do you do endurance athletics or why do you do mountaineering? It's because you're working through trauma, and like if you haven't put the time in to sort that stuff out, and like are you still a person that everyone wants to hang out with even when you're hurt or even when you can't do this thing anymore? um that's because
You
like
know,
if you've been distracted the whole time, it's easy to miss it and not do the work.
do you remember, because you made me think of something about selection, actually, that where what you just said holds true in a really big way. I remember at selection watching people that physically were just studs, but the moment their bodies start to break down, they couldn't do it anymore. They'd quit. And I think it's because they were so invested, like their physicality was them. It was their self-identity, right?
Right.
And the thought of being damaged to where they couldn't do it anymore, even just the potential of it, like, was something they just couldn't deal with. And I think this all kind of ties in together, really, when you think about it, because they probably had never spent that time we're talking about alone with themselves to understand it well enough that what they could do is not really who they are.
Right.
And I found it kind of ironic because I remember thinking about this a lot during selection when I went through that the people that made it through were the people that just didn't care what it did to them to a degree, like they were so determined to do it that if they got permanently hurt doing it and still succeeded, they were going to live with that.
Or even that they were willing to accept that they weren't the person at the start of selection that they were 2 weeks in.
Yeah.
They looked at it honestly and said, I'm tired, my feet hurt, I am burnt out mentally, but I'm going to find a way to do this. I'm going to find a way, I'm going to accept the limitations and find a way to find my strengths and to dig deep into that. And like, I think there are a lot of people, especially in that. I don't know the percentages. I think it's around 1% are even eligible to go to some of these higher end selection processes. But at that point, everyone's a good athlete. Some are
Yeah.
spectacular.
Oh yeah.
But some have never failed in their life. And that first failure can be just debilitating. And I remember there were a couple of guys in our selection class who were going through for the third time. And I was blown away. Like, this sucks. Like, exactly how bad this sucks. And they came back for more. They were told, like, you can come back if you want to. And they did. And they came back knowing how bad it was going to be. And they had done a lot of work, and all of them ultimately passed. But man, that kind of mental resiliency is amazing to me. Like,
Oh
to
yeah.
know how bad it's going to be, to know how much you're going to hurt, and to be willing to come back and do that again. Way more mental strength and character than the person who breezes through it the first time. Like, hats off to those guys who never struggled in selection. But man,
Well,
big
I
hit.
think, yeah, I think if you don't struggle and you don't fail, going back to kind of the theme of our last 20 minutes, you don't really know yourself. Like I think failure is an important part of the process. Like you said earlier, it needs to be in a safe enough environment to allow the failure.
Right.
But if you don't fail, you don't know what your limitations are. You don't know what you're capable of or not capable of. You don't know what it feels like to fail. It's like somebody who wants to be a fighter and has never been punched in the face. The first time you're punched in the face, it's a bit of a shock, you
Wow.
know, and you've got to experience that in a safe environment before you have it happen for real. And I think going back to another theme we were talking about, I think that failure and the ability to keep going does more for your development, both as an athlete or a soldier or a person than easy success, like without a doubt. Being able to deal with the failure and pick up the pieces. And who said it? Who said fail if you need to, but fail quickly?
I
It was some SF guy, but I can't remember who it was. But I always thought that was a brilliant thing to say, because everybody's going to fail. How quickly can you recover?
Yeah,
Like, how quick can you learn your lesson and drive on?
yeah, and you can definitely see people go down the spiral, you know, and because I'm not sure that I remember anyone who didn't have a moment of weakness, a failure, something that was, like they did something stupid at selection. Like we all know that every one of us did something or had a moment where we were like at our limit. And, but you got to wake up the next day and try again, and even if you succeeded, you could fail the next day. And so like we all knew that like everyone had struggled at some point. And you knew that what they did, what was more important than what they did, is they came back and they bounced back and they kept working. And you could see it in the people who were genuinely trying. Like you knew that they had failed. Like I remember there was another guy who walked the soles of his feet off in the first couple of days. Like,
We had a guy like that. Yeah, he wound up putting duct tape all over his feet.
yeah, but man, the mental strength to wake up every morning and put your feet back in the boots, you're like, this is a guy worth covering for, you
Oh,
know?
and the guy we had, he made it. He was in the Q course with me, and he made it through the Q course.
Yeah. So like that kind of mental resiliency is really hard. And when you watch people overcoming that, you realize that you're going to look out for each other. And that's really positive. But like you said, it's also what you do alone. All that long time alone with a heavy backpack in the dark. And it's so tempting to get on the road and just run and
Yeah.
make it easy, as opposed to thrashing your way through and being cold and wet and tired.
And how many people just gave up out there? I remember seeing people they just gave up. They just stopped. They knew they were going to fail and they just stopped.
Yep.
And I think that back to like intrinsically character building traits, right? That willingness to keep going, even if you think you've already failed, is huge too. Because a lot of times you think you failed and you haven't failed yet.
Right.
You see it all the time in athletic competition, right? Like you think that it's over. It's over. I've lost. And then you actually didn't. My biggest placement ever at a major shooting match, I had a horrible match. I was sure I was going to be like at the bottom of the pile. Like it was just so bad. There was a sandstorm and the weather was miserable and a cold snap came through and everybody's hands were frozen and I just shot like crap, right? And I got first place in the senior division. And I was sure that I was like at the bottom of the barrel, like 100%.
Right.
But if you just keep going, you don't know how it's going to shake out yet. You haven't lost yet, right? You don't know what the other person's going to do. You don't know what the other team's going to do. You don't know what everybody else is going through. You don't know, like in selection, sometimes you just don't know what they're looking at. Sometimes it's designed to make you feel like you failed so they can check you out, And I think that building, because it's one of those things that you have to consciously build this in yourself, I think, because we all have the same feelings and emotions about failure and about how we're doing and self-image stuff and all of that, right? But I think you have to consciously build this ability to keep going even if you think it's lost. And I'm not talking about making a bad decision. Like in the real world in life, sometimes you want to abandon something because it's become a poor decision. Like you were talking about climbing earlier, knowing when to walk away, right? That's not what I'm talking about though. I'm talking about just that like gut feeling, that emotion that I've failed, even
Right.
though I'm still in the fight. And I think that's one of the things that selection gives people. I think it's one of the things that, high level athletic competition gives people, fighting competitively gives people, is that knowing when I just feel like I'm going to lose and I don't really know yet and I need to keep going. as opposed to like what you were talking about earlier, where it's okay, this is unsafe and I need to stop.
Right. Well, and I think also like it doesn't even have to be high level athletics. You know, if you look at, I did some triathlons for a while and had a lot of fun, you know, and some days you're going to have a great race. You know, like I've had races like did a half Ironman where it was just kind of effortless the whole way, you know, and I definitely wasn't as fast as the guys who won, but I didn't do bad. And I remember sitting around the end, like watching some of these people for whom like they had fallen apart. Like I'd passed them a long time ago, but they got through. And that sense of accomplishment of like knowing that people are going past you and they stayed in it and they made it to the end, and it was a huge accomplishment. And they're not pros, they're just average people, you know, who have put in some time, and maybe they had a bad day, maybe they were, you know, just not gonna be that fast, but they didn't quit, you know, and they got to the end of that and it was transformational for them because they achieved the goal of finishing. And I see this especially with like pro athletes in a lot of sports. You know, I I knew a guy who he was an incredible athlete and he was definitely a world class talent. But the minute he was out of the top five, he just fell apart and he would just quit races. And it was really wild to watch, you know, and because like you never know, like you said, like maybe you're feeling yourself going backwards and you're struggling, and but you don't know how everyone else is doing. And you know, the the real victory is over yourself. The real struggle is with yourself. And it's hard when you have no sense of how other people are doing, but you never know. And then you see people suddenly come back. Like I have friends who are ultra runners and they talk about being in the pain cave for 20 miles. Like we're we're talking about like having GI issues and cramps for hours.
For an entire marathon. Yeah.
Yeah. And then like, oh yeah, and then I started to feel better. So I knew I just had to work through it. And that's just amazing to me, you know, and you're out there alone in the dark, you're running for hours, you know, and it's so impressive. Like I have a friend who does ultra distance cycling, and, you know, and the rules on those races are like, you don't, you can text, you can call people on the phone, you can't have a pacer, and you can't, like, you, if you're going to take support, it has to be support that everyone can do. But like, I'll watch her tracker when she's out there and I'm like, wow, she's struggling. And I can sort of sometimes correlate, like when she's struggling, I get more texts and I can tell that like she's struggling. But like in multi-day events, like all of a sudden she's jumped and she's back in the game. And it's really cool to hear those stories of people who are, you know, like working through that, you know, and have just decided that they're just going to change their attitude, and all of a sudden everything turns around. And that's really cool because they've sort of faced that ugly side of themselves and that demon, and they've decided to like make friends with it and then find something else to motivate them. And that's a pretty powerful thing when that happens for people.
Oh, I think it's a huge thing, especially because we all have that demon, like the urge to quit, the urge to stop. It's in all of us. It's just, can you master it? Can you have the discipline to overcome it?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, brother, it has been great catching up with you.
It's awesome.
We are well over an hour, so I'm probably going to have to cut this short. But
No worries.
It's been way too long, man.
Yeah.
really glad to see you're doing well. It's really cool to talk to you. If I make it out to Oregon, I'm big in Portland for some reason. I'm not sure why, but I'll have to try to look you up at some point. Maybe overcome my distaste of the snow long enough to come get a cross country skiing lesson or something.
Or come out in the summer. Come out to, like, if you make it out to the Cascades. I mean, Smith Rock's a pretty amazing place, and it's sunny and beautiful, and it's hot, and it's rock climbing, and you know, come on out and climb, and I'll see if I can remember how to pull the trigger on something.
Oh, we could definitely do that. And if you ever want to come down to Texas, I am now in what is officially the barbecue capital of Texas by state decree.
Oh,
So a lot of good food, a lot of good
yep.
food.
My inner fat kid loved being down in Austin and teaching down there. So
Well, do you come down here that often?
no, I taught a couple of courses down in Austin. We ran them with the guys. We just needed a venue, and Austin's a great venue. So I spent like 5 months down there. I think it's like 2013 or 14.
Okay.
So just teaching urban stuff.
Yeah, I am now in Lockhart, which is just south of Austin. So
Right on.
yeah,
Yeah.
nice little small Texas town, close enough to Austin to go into town for the comedy shows and Rogan and all that, but far enough out that I'm not in Austin itself.
Yeah. No, it's
My
pretty.
days of my days of living in the city proper are done. I'm through with that.
Well, the beauty is that there's food trucks all over, and so you can always find something good.
This is true. This is definitely true.
I definitely had some contentious discussions with people down there about the fact that I didn't think that Tex-Mex was as good as Southern California Mex.
Oh,
But
sacrilege. We can't be
uh,
friends anymore, dude. You can't say
um,
that shit.
like I know that you can evolve as a person, and that your taste buds just need to recognize how good a Southern California burrito is versus a Tex-Mex burrito. Like, there's just no compliment.
Well, despite what you just said, I'm still your friend.
Strong opinions weekly held.
I would actually, we should do, because like I know I can get Chicago pizza shipped to me here because we do it all the time.
Oh, damn.
Taste of home. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's somewhere in Southern California that ships burritos. Because here's what we do. You come down for a visit and we each get a burrito from each and eat them side by side.
That could be
Do a
tough.
comparison. Do a comparison.
I mean, I would guess that as big as San Diego is, there would be potential for, like, there's got to be someone who does Tex-Mex style close enough to a solid Southern California burrito. I feel like this is a quest worth pursuing.
I think so. I think we need to figure out, what metrics we're going to use for measurement. And I mean, we can't really do a double blind because it's just the two of us, but we'll try to make it as scientific as possible.
Yeah.
We'll see who comes out on top.
Well, and it's important to have the data be greater than n equals 1.
All right, brother. Before we get off of here, tell everybody how they can get your services if they want to go learn how to climb or make their way through the snowy woods and all that other good stuff you do.
Yeah, so I work for a variety of organizations. In the wintertime, I'm out in Idaho. I work for Sawtooth Mountain Guides. And then in the summer, I'm out in the Cascades working for Blackbird and Pro Guiding. And you can reach me on Instagram at Mountain Milo. Look me up, follow me along, and come out and play in the mountains with me.
All right, brother. Like I said, it's been a great conversation. Hope everybody out there enjoyed it as much as I did. And I will talk to all of you next time.
All right. Thanks for the time.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Way is in Training. Please come back again as we explore how training makes us better at our craft and better in our everyday lives. See all of you soon.